and Riley Cooper, just to give you a quick update on what happened, was caught on video at a Kenny Chesney concert in June. Video just released yesterday making a racial slur or sounding bigoted in some way, shape, or form. And when that video came out, he was fined by the Eagles. He came out and apologized. His teammates, specifically Michael Vick, stood up and said, we forgive him. And now the Eagles, it seems like, are prepared to move on. We heard Roger Goodell earlier said that there would not be any more further suspension from Major League Baseball or from the NFL. The NFL would let the Philadelphia suspension or the Philadelphia punishment stand. And to get more on that, we'll bring in Phil Sheridan from the Philadelphia Inquirer right now. Phil, was there any inkling that this video was out there before it was released?
No, absolutely not. Riley Cooper was asked that specifically yesterday. He said that he found out about it when it went on. Originally went on Crossing Broad, a local Philly sports blog, and then it popped up on Deadspin pretty quickly thereafter. And the Eagles PR staff came to him and showed it to him, and that was the first he'd heard of it. He said, now he may have heard rumblings before that, because another blog locally published an email exchange that purported to be about someone trying to sell them the video, and they decided not to buy it. Money wasn't discussed, so I don't know if it was eventually paid for by Crossing Broad or not. That's a question they haven't answered at this point, I don't think. But according to Riley Cooper, it totally sprung out of nowhere on him, and he didn't know about it until he was watching it on the internet.
To your knowledge, Phil, does Riley Cooper have a history of this type of bigotry, of saying these types of things?
No, not at all to my knowledge. I'm not around him. I haven't been around him that much, talked to him that much. He's been a backup wide receiver, special teams guy here for a couple of years. Not a guy I have a lot of occasion to talk with, and is always in locker room situations. He was involved in an incident when he was in, I think he was in high school or still in college, early in college. He was arrested. Charges were eventually dropped. He punched out a windshield and broke his hand. It actually cost him some playing time. And ironically, in Philadelphia, the Phillies had drafted him as a baseball player back then. He's from the Clearwater area, and that's where their spring training is. But he elected to go to college and play football instead of signing with the Phillies at that time. So he ended up in Philadelphia with the Eagles as a fifth-round draft pick. What
did you make of the Eagles' reaction yesterday and how they handled the situation?
Yeah, I think they did the quick, easy thing, and I wrote a column for today's paper that I felt like they underdid it a little bit. Andy Reid would suspend players for a game or two for missing meetings or for conduct in the locker room that he felt was inappropriate or not good for the team. I think this is a very public embarrassment of the entire league, the Eagles, their brand. It puts every player in the locker room now into a situation where he's going to have to answer questions about racial relations within the locker room that not everybody necessarily wants to address or feels comfortable with. I mean, it's a relatively large hand grenade that Riley Cooper rolled into the locker room there, and I thought a suspension would have been in order. I'm not talking about sending the guy to prison for the rest of his life. I'm just talking about maybe a suspension that says, there are real consequences here. I think, he's not a big money guy. He's due to make $630,000 this year. So by NFL standards, he's a working class guy, and a fine will cause him some pain. But I think the perception in public is rich athlete pays a fine is basically nothing. I mean, that's how people see it, because it's real money's not real to these guys in a lot of senses. So I think that was not enough. I think a fine and a strongly worded statement just seems like, all right, let's move on here. Jeremy Maclin got hurt. We might need this guy, and that kind of puts football ahead of everything else, and just doesn't look real good to me.
He's Phil Sheridan from the Philadelphia Inquirer, joining me here on the Dan Patrick Show. Phil, you mentioned Jeremy Maclin, and if he were healthy, would this be a different story? Or more to the point, if this was the third-string linebacker or the fourth-string, offensive lineman, would the punishment have been different?
I don't think so. I like to think not. I mean, you like to think it's just based on the facts at hand and doing the right thing. Again, you like to think that. I just think that the impression they create is that football is a little more important than a player misrepresenting your organization to this degree. So they cut Terrell Owens back in the day because he was just disruptive in the locker room. I mean that whatever he said or did in public, they just felt like guy is causing trouble for us, and they cut him, and he's a superstar at that time for them. So I think that they would handle almost anybody about the same. I just don't think they went far enough.
In terms of creating closure, Phil, how important was Michael Vick's reaction, sort of being stepping out as a representative for the team? He's the guy you're seeing on sound bites on TV. How important was that he reacted in the way he did, where he said he forgave him and essentially said he spoke for the team and said, we forgive him?
I think it's immensely important, and, it's one of those things. I mean, Vic came here under difficult circumstances, as everybody knows, and, he's a guy that was afforded a second chance, and for him to take the high road, it's very big. It's big in terms of his leadership in the locker room and perceived by the public as a leader on the team. I think that's important, and it's one of those character revealing things. I mean, Jason Avant also came out. He's a wide receiver who sits next to Riley Cooper in every meeting and has known him the whole time Riley's been on the team. And he came out and said, this hurt. It hurt. It was shocking, but I believe in God's forgiveness, so I'm going to forgive. I'm going to forgive my friend, and I think that these guys showed a level of character and maturity that unfortunately Riley Cooper did not.
Have you been able to gauge reaction from any other players in the locker room? Are those two the ones that have been front and center?
A few guys came out last night after meetings, and D'Amico Ryan spoke, Fletcher Cox, probably about a half dozen players. Oddly, none of the guys who were at the Kenny Chesney concert, as far as I'm aware, along with Riley Cooper that night, none of those fellows have come out and spoken. So there were some guys that were there. I'm not sure who all saw it. Center Jason Kelsey's actually in the video. You can see him at the very beginning of the video. He's the guy with the beard with his hand on Riley's shoulder trying to calm him down, it looks like. But, didn't do anything. There's no reason for him to not want to, acknowledge his presence there. But half the team was on stage with Kenny Chesney, so it's not like a secret who was there. They were all there. But none of those guys, near as I could tell, came out and talked last night.
If this had happened on the field, if he had used that word during a game, do you think the reaction would have been different?
Possibly. That's a good question. In some ways, this is worse to me because this is really just out in public. I mean, the guy's got a camera in his face or a cell phone, whatever was making the video. It's pretty clear that he's being videotaped, and he's totally comfortable saying a word that I think most of us learned that you just don't say when we were little kids. So in some ways, it's worse because he's basically abusing a minimum wage security guard at a concert. So that I don't know. In the heat of the moment on the field, you do hear players say things. Kobe Bryant had the homophobic slur thing a couple years ago on court kind of thing, and I think that gets handled more, as sort of part of the heat of battle or something. This is just a guy out in public and just happened to get caught on video. I mean, it really begs the question of whether this is just a normal night out, for Riley Cooper or not. And he says no, but the rest of us can only take his word.
From your perspective, Phil, is this over? Is this something that, all sides are ready to move on from? And do you think that's possible at this point? Do you think he can go into this season and have a normal season under these circumstances?
I think it can be possible. I think what I suspect would happen, and based on experience of a lot of situations here, especially with the Eagles, things tend to mushroom and start to grow. There's going to be a whole secondary wave of commentary. This thing tends to draw attention from, outside the sports media world. Maybe that won't happen. Maybe Riley Cooper's not a big enough name, to draw, national television and, non-sports media, commentary and criticism. I don't know. Will Eagles sponsors, call up and say, hey, wait a minute, we're spending a lot of money to identify with your brand, and now this, and we don't want that. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we may not know about right away, but the Eagles will have to deal with. And over time, I think there are going to be players in the locker room who just aren't good with this, and are going to look at this guy funny, and that's a corrosive kind of thing. It might not. I hate to bring T.O. up again, but he divided an entire locker room and basically ruined a season the year after the Eagles went to a Super Bowl. I mean, that team was never the same after what happened with him. So, these things can sort of percolate and then, explode later or turn out to be a big deal later, after everyone tries to hush it up and move on in the early stages. So I guess we'll just have to see.
Good to talk to you, Phil. Thank you.
My pleasure, Chris. Anytime.
That's Phil Sheridan, Philadelphia Inquirer, joining me here on the Dan Patrick Show.